Have you ever wondered how a mother can move on after losing the most precious thing she had? How can you continue breathing when the pain squeezes your chest so much that it seems impossible to live? This story will show you that even in the darkest days, when everything seems lost, God is still writing a greater purpose. Because what happened to this woman goes beyond human understanding. It's the kind of testimony that can only be explained by one word: miracle. She was no different from so many other mothers. He woke up early, worked hard, took care of his son with love and faith. Her life revolved around him, and she always said, "As long as my son is well, I am happy." But in a matter of seconds, everything changed. An unexpected call, devastating news, and her world simply fell apart. The son, his only son, was gone. No warning, no time for one last hug, no chance of goodbye. It was as if the floor had disappeared. The pain of cooked, yes, loss of absence invaded every part of his being. And maybe you who are watching me know this pain well. You may have also asked yourself, where is God when everything goes wrong? It is in these moments that faith is put to the test. It's when the tears flow without stopping, when the soul screams in silence, when there are no answers, that many think about giving up. And she thought, she screamed, she questioned, she locked herself in a dark room where there were only memories and a pain that seemed to have no end. But it was there in the midst of despair that something began to change. And no, it didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a magic pass. It was a presence, a peace, a touch that no human hand could offer. It was God. Yes, God entered that pain. He didn't take away the suffering immediately, but he began to transform the emptiness into hope. And the most surprising thing was what he did afterwards. Because when God acts, he doesn't just console, they transform. He takes what was broken and makes it new. He takes the ashes and creates beauty. And what he did to this mother, you need to see with your own eyes. If you have experienced losses, if you carry marks that no one sees, if you have cried alone and asked if there is still a way, stay until the end of this video. This story can renew your faith, and more than that, she can prove that God never abandons his children, even when everything seems silent. Now, pay attention, because what are you going to hear next? It's not just a story of overcoming. Is a revelation of God's supernatural action in the midst of the deepest pain that a human being can face. But before continuing this life-changing story, I need to tell you something very serious. Stories like this don't come along every day. What happened at the end was so powerful, so impactful, that you need to be prepared to listen. It's not an exaggeration. It's a testimony that has transformed people wherever it goes. And that could be exactly the answer you've been asking God for. Then don't leave this video for anything. What comes next could be the key to your fresh start, or even the hope that someone close to you so desperately needs. In times like these, where so many people are drowning in sadness, doubt, and silence, staying informed about how God has been working is more than important. It's urgent. And look, if this story has touched your heart so far, leave your like right now. This isn't just a gesture, it's a sign that you believe in the power of faith, and it helps YouTube show that testimony to more people who might be on the verge of giving up. Subscribe to the channel too, because every week we are sharing real stories of transformation, faith, and renewal, and you won't want to miss what's coming. Now take a deep breath, because what God did next, it is impossible to explain with human words. Marta has always been one of those women who carries the world on her shoulders, but with a smile on her face. A single mother from a young age, she didn't have time to dream of big things for herself. Her entire life began to revolve around a single purpose: to give her son everything she never had. And we're not just talking about material things. She wanted to give affection, dignity, care. She wanted to show that even in struggle, it's possible to be happy when you have love and faith. His name was Samuel, a boy with sweet eyes and a generous heart. Since he was little, he demonstrated a different maturity, a rare sensitivity. He was the type who hugged for no reason, who asked if his mother was okay even when he didn't even know how to write properly. He was the joy of the house, the sound of his footsteps running through the yard, his laughter, the way he called Marta my queen. All of this filled that simple house with an atmosphere of love and light. Samuel was much more than a son. He was Martha's miracle, a gift she believed she received directly from the hands of God. And even with so many difficulties, late rent, heavy work, sleepless nights, she never complained. She said with conviction, "As long as my son is healthy, God will provide the rest." And that was how she lived, with unshakable faith. Marta did everything: cleaning houses, taking care of the elderly, selling sweets, everything with dignity, everything with a heart full of hope. And when the sadness got worse, she looked at Samuel and remembered that it was worth continuing, that God hadn't abandoned her, that your effort was being seen from heaven. The two had a special connection. They went to church together, prayed together before going to sleep, and even created a prayer box where they wrote requests and thanks. Samuel said he wanted to be a doctor when he grew up. He wanted to heal people like Jesus did. He was a boy with a simple but powerful faith. And Marta, even with all the scars of life, felt blessed, because in the midst of so much pain he had already faced, there was his greatest victory. His son was his motivation, his best friend, his journey companion. This was more than motherhood. It was a mission. It was delivery. But what no one knew, not Marta, not Samuel, not anyone, was that their story was about to be marked by something that would change everything forever. Because life, no matter how well it is going, sometimes brings trials that challenge even the firmest faith. And Marta, even so strong, even so full of faith, had no idea how much pain she was about to face. And perhaps it is at this point in the story that you begin to identify, because who has never experienced a season of peace only to be surprised by an unexpected storm? This is exactly why we need to pay attention to the signs, to the small details of life, because the enemy tries to hit us precisely when we are most off guard. And when pain arrives, it often comes without explanation, without warning, without mercy. Maybe you've already lost someone. Maybe you too have felt like a part of your heart has been ripped out. Maybe you've already screamed into your pillow asking why. If you've been through this, then you know that this pain has no name, and you will understand exactly what Marta felt when that phone call rang at her house. But before we go to this turning point, I want to give you a warning. This story is not being told here for nothing. It's not just another video on the internet. God has used this channel, these real stories, these testimonies of transformation to touch hearts and lift lives that were fallen. If you've come this far, it's not by chance. There is a purpose in every second you are watching. There is something that God wants to minister to your heart, and there is someone who needs to hear this. So, don't keep this video to yourself. You can be an instrument in God's hands to bring hope to someone who is one step away from giving up. Click like right now, because this helps this content reach more lives. And subscribe to the channel, because every week we bring stories like this, of pain, yes, but also of overcoming, of miracles, of transformation. And you won't want to miss what's yet to come. I promise you, what God did in Marta's life will give you goosebumps. And you know what? While you are watching, many people in the comments share similar stories. There are people who have already experienced profound losses, people who overcame their grief with God's help, others who are still in the midst of pain. And this has created a community of support, of faith, of consolation. Then, if this story has moved you so far, write in the comments, "I believe that God transforms pain into purpose." Write it as an act of faith, as a declaration. And if you want, also share the name of someone you want to see restored. We are praying together for each life that passes through here. And now it's time to move on with this story. Because unfortunately, The pain has arrived, and when it arrived with force, with violence, without mercy. Marta, that woman of faith, warrior, used to fighting, found herself facing the biggest battle of her life, and nothing she had experienced before prepared her for that moment. What happened that day forever marked his story. And that's when you'll understand why this story is being told. Because it is at this point that the presence of God begins to reveal itself in a supernatural way. Stay with me, because now we're going to dive into the moment everything turned around. And when I say it was supernatural, you'll understand why. It was a morning like any other. Marta had prepared the simple coffee every day, a stale loaf of bread, some old coffee from the night before. Samuel left early, as he always did. He was excited about a school project and promised his mother that when he returned, he would help her organize the small closet that was always messy. "I love you, Mom," he said, with that smile that brightened up even the most difficult days. And that was it, the last time Marta saw her son alive. The hours passed slowly that day. The clock seemed to mock her eagerness to see him back. But instead of the footsteps running down the hallway, the sound of the gate slamming, or the cheerful voice saying, "I'm home," what came was the ringing of a telephone, that touch, that sound that no one forgets. It was an unknown call. Marta answered, unconcerned. But on the other end of the line, she heard a tense, urgent, cold voice. His son had been in an accident. He was being taken to the hospital in a very serious condition. The ground disappeared beneath his feet. The hands shook. The phone fell to the floor. Marta tried to breathe, tried to understand if it was real. She ran. She came out barefoot with the clothes she was wearing. He didn't take a bag. He didn't take any documents. I could only repeat his name. Samuel, my God, Samuel. The journey to the hospital seemed eternal. And when he arrived, all he found were closed faces, doctors who avoided eye contact, nurses who looked at each other in silence. When they finally called her name, she already knew. Deep down, she already knew. But he refused to believe it, until he heard the words, "Unfortunately, there was nothing we could do." At that moment, Marta's world stopped. Time froze. The heart, which was beating fast, simply fell silent. She fell to her knees, screamed so loudly that it felt like her soul had been ripped from her body. "No, God, no, please, take me instead," she repeated. People around her cried with her, but no amount of comfort was enough. Because that pain has no consolation. That pain is an abyss, its absence taking shape, it's the silence becoming unbearable. Marta threw herself on the floor, hugging her son's now cold body, as if she could bring him back with the strength of love. But he didn't come back. In that cold room, Marta stopped being just a mother. She became a survivor of the cruelest grief there is. Because there is no greater pain than losing a child. There is no loss that compares. And maybe you, who are watching this video now, know this pain. Perhaps you have already experienced this type of loss. Maybe I'm living now. And if this is your case, I want you to know God is watching your heart. He understands every tear. He hears every silent moan. And as impossible as it may seem, He still has something to do. In those days that followed, Marta turned into a shadow. I didn't eat, didn't sleep. I didn't talk to anyone. People tried to help, but she completely closed herself off. Samuel's room remained intact. Every object, every piece of clothing, every memory became a dagger in the heart. At night, she would lie in his bed and cry until she fell asleep. In the morning, I could barely get up. He began to doubt everything he believed. He began to question the sky. He began to think that praying might not help. After all, where was God when his son needed help? Why didn't he prevent that accident? Why did you take him so soon? These questions echoed day and night in his mind. What was once faith was now pain. What was once certainty was now doubt. Marta, who had faced so many struggles and never crumbled, was now shattered. And perhaps this is where many of you connect with her. Because there are moments in life that are not just difficult, they are impossible. Moments when the soul screams and the world continues, indifferent. Moments when we wonder if it's still worth continuing. Have you ever felt this? If you've been through something similar or know someone who has, write here in the comments, I understand this pain. Don't be ashamed to open up. This space is safe. This channel is made for that. To console, welcome, strengthen. And if you've never experienced a loss like this, but are feeling the weight of life bearing down on you, write, Lord, strengthen my faith. Let's pray for each comment. Let's form a chain of intercession, of faith, of empathy. Because no one should face pain alone. In the meantime, I want to ask you, if this story is moving you, don't forget to leave a like right now. This shows YouTube that this content is relevant and helps bring hope to those who need it. Subscribe to the channel too, because here in each video we reveal testimonies that show that God is still in control, even when everything seems lost. You can't imagine how many people have been touched, restored, saved through these stories, and you can be part of it. Marta, even immersed in pain, still didn't know that the sky was already moving for her. Just when she thought it was all over, God was starting something new. But at that moment, she was still at rock bottom. It was still silent. I still questioned whether I would ever smile again. The despair was so great that she even thought about ending it all. And here, an important warning is worth. If you are feeling this way, don't ignore this feeling. Talk to someone. Ask for help. Pray. Cry out. Because the same God who acted in Marta's life can act in yours. And it's no exaggeration to say that, at that point, she was hanging on by a thread. The pain of loss, the emptiness of absence, the weight of guilt for not having protected his son. All of this came together in an emotional avalanche that crushed his faith. She no longer saw any sense in anything, but God saw. And God had not given up on her, not even from you. What happened in the following days is something the human mind cannot explain, because even when everything seemed like noise, the Spirit of God began to move silently but powerfully. And it was in this environment of total darkness that the first spark of hope was born. It was there in the midst of pain, mourning and disbelief that Marta heard a voice that did not come from outside but from within. A soft, almost imperceptible voice that said, I am with you. She thought she was going crazy. He thought it was imagination, but that voice was repeated, and little by little something inside her began to react. The heart was still hurt, but now it beat differently. It still hurt, but there was something, a presence, a reminder of the love she once felt, a living memory that God never left her, even in the deepest pain. And that's where the turning point in this story begins. But not yet now, because before the miracle came the most important moment in Marta's life, the moment when she, even without understanding anything, decided to surrender completely to God. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next part, because when your heart breaks completely, this is where God begins to rebuild from scratch. Stay with me. What comes next will touch your spirit in ways you never imagined. The night seemed to have no end. Marta spent hours staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the screaming silence of that room that was once full of life, laughter, and plans. Now, all that was left was the muffled sound of her suppressed crying, the ragged breathing of someone who was struggling to just carry on. The son's smell was still permeated on the sheets, on the clothes, on the pillow. It was as if he was still there somehow, but it wasn't, and she knew it. The absence was real, sharp, non-negotiable. The days following the funeral were the most painful of his life. Marta didn't want to eat, she didn't want to talk, she didn't want to live. The faith that was once his strength now seemed like a distant echo. She felt betrayed, abandoned by God. Not because I no longer believed in him, but because I couldn't understand. How can a God of love allow a mother to lose her own child? How can she accept that that boy full of dreams, so good, so pure, was taken from her so suddenly? She slept clutching Samuel's favorite t-shirt, as if the fabric still contained a piece of him. Sometimes I ran my fingers over the name embroidered on the school uniform, closed my eyes, and imagined that it was all just a nightmare, that he would walk through the door at any moment, sweaty from school, asking for bread and butter. But it didn't come, and that crushed her. The days were mixing with the nights. Everything became a grey mass of pain and apathy. Marta stopped opening the curtains. He stopped looking at his cell phone. He stopped answering calls. She was slowly disconnecting from the world. But God, he never stopped being there. That morning, perhaps the darkest of all, she dragged herself to the living room. Not even she can say how. It was in pieces, weak, dirty with tears. She lay down on the cold floor, hugging her t-shirt like she always did. But that day, it was different. She didn't just cry, she screamed, not with the voice, but with the soul, with everything that was still left inside her. It was at that moment that his strength ran out, but it was also the moment when God began to act. With her face pressed against the ground, she murmured between sobs, "God, I have nothing left. You took everything away. If you don't lift me up, I won't live again." And suddenly, something happened. She saw no angels, heard no audible voices. There was no thunder or lightning, but inside her, something moved. A warmth took over his chest. It wasn't physical. It was a presence, a soft certainty, almost like an invisible hug. Marta couldn't explain it, but she knew God was there. She remained motionless for a few minutes, perhaps hours, with my eyes still full of tears, but with my heart beating differently. The pain was still there, but now there was something more, a small seed of peace, of hope. It was as if, even without understanding the reason for the pain, she began to realize that there was still a purpose, that his story didn't end there, that God, even in silence, was writing something. The next morning, Marta did not go out singing hymns. She didn't wake up healed, restored, happy. It wasn't magic, it was faith. And faith often begins as a decision, a choice to believe when everything around screams otherwise. She got out of bed, opened the curtains for the first time in days, and let the sunlight in. It was painful, but necessary. Every ray that touched his skin was like a reminder, you're still alive, and I'm still here. So she decided to do something simple. She picked up the prayer box that she and Samuel used, the one that was forgotten in the corner of the closet. When he opened it, he found little notes written by him. "Lord, help Mom win. Thank you, God, because we have food. I want to be a doctor to take care of others." It broke her again. But this time, it was a different break. It was a break that brought to light the mission she still had, the love that still existed, the faith that needed to be rekindled. And you who are watching this video, maybe you are on this same floor. Maybe your pain is not the loss of a child, but it could be a divorce, a betrayal, a bankruptcy, an incurable illness, a silent depression. Maybe you are also saying, "God, if you don't lift me up, I can't do it." And that's why I tell you, cry out. Even without strength, even in tears, cry out, because God listens and He acts. If this part of the story spoke to you, if you have ever had a moment like this of total surrender, or if you are going through it now, write here in the comments, "I surrender, God." Don't be afraid to expose yourself. We are not here to judge, but to walk together. Your declaration of faith could be the beginning of a new stage. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share this video right now. You can be the instrument that God will use to lift someone up today. And please leave your like right now, because this helps this video reach more people who are living exactly what Marta lived. People who need to see that there is still hope. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed yet, because this isn't just another story. What you will see next is a living testimony that God transforms pain into purpose, tears into mission, grief into ministry. Marta still had a long way to go. The pain didn't go away, the hole didn't close, But now she was no longer alone in the dark. She felt the constant presence of God, and it was this presence that began to rebuild it, little by little. The most surprising thing is that God's action did not stop there, because what he began in secret, he was about to reveal in public. The pain that Marta experienced, he would transform into an instrument of healing for other lives. But this is what you will discover in the next part, because what comes now will show you the true meaning of the word miracle. It was a few days after that early morning surrender that Marta, still fragile, still injured, received a message on her cell phone. It was from an old neighbor, someone she hadn't seen in years. The message was simple, but it carried an invitation that would change everything. "We are having a special meeting at church this Sunday. I remembered you. If you want to come, our doors are open." Marta read that message more than once. He didn't respond at the time. In fact, she didn't know if she had the strength. Go to church, see people, sing praises. She could barely get out of bed, let alone open up to the world again. But there was something different about that message, something that touched your heart. Maybe the time was right. Maybe it was God, once again, whispering in the midst of the pain. "I still have something for you." On Sunday, for the first time in months, she left the house with no purpose other than surviving the day. She dressed in simple clothes, tied her hair up, and even with her eyes still marked by sleepless nights, she went. Each step to the church seemed to weigh tons, but Marta knew deep down that she was going to the right place. When she arrived, she was greeted with sincere hugs, the kind that require no explanation. The environment was simple, but filled with something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. That kind of peace that doesn't come from circumstances, but from presence, a peace that only the Holy Spirit can generate. In that service, while praise filled the room, Marta closed her eyes. And when the song started to say, "God wipes away the tears and remakes the heart," she collapsed. He cried like never before, but this time, it wasn't just pain. It was delivery. It was healing. It was relief. It was as if all the prayers she had never been able to finish were being answered right there in that moment. It was as if God said, "Daughter, I never left your side. I was with you even in the silence." And it was there, in the middle of that choir of simple voices, that Marta felt something born inside her. A spark, a breath, a flame. She was alive, and God still wanted to use her. From that day on, Marta began attending services regularly. I always sat in the same corner, observed, listened, absorbed. Sometimes I cried, sometimes I smiled. But in every service, he felt like God was stitching his broken heart together with invisible threads of love. And it was in this environment of faith and restoration that she met other women who, like her, were also grieving. Mothers who buried children, widows who lost their husbands, grandparents who raised grandchildren alone, women hurt but still standing. And there in that group, something extraordinary emerged, a communion that only shared pain can generate. They started meeting during the I week. They prayed together, cried together, read the word. A support group was born, not out of strategy but out of necessity, and this group became a shelter for broken souls. Marta, who before could barely look anyone in the eye, now listened, hugged, advised, and most surprising, she began to testify. He told his story. He spoke of the pain of loss, of the night he gave himself to God, of the warmth he felt in his chest, of the peace that gradually invaded his home. And every time he spoke, something new happened, not just in people but in herself, because witnessing heals. When she spoke, the words came out like balm. And as she listened to her own story, she remembered God really was with her the whole time. And then, at one of these meetings, a shy young man approached him after hearing his testimony, eyes down, voice trembling. Marta didn't know him, but the look in his eyes said it all. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "because what you said today saved my life." She was speechless. He continued, "I was going to kill myself this week. I already had it all planned out, but my sister brought me to this group. And when I heard her story, I realized that God can still lift me up. That went through Marta like an arrow. She cried. He hugged that young man. They prayed together, and at that moment she understood clearly your purpose still existed, and it was bigger than she could ever imagine. God was using her pain to rescue others. What seemed like the end became an instrument in the hands of God. Marta was not just a survivor, she was now a channel, a voice, living proof that God's grace is sufficient even in the darkest valleys. And make no mistake, this doesn't mean the pain is gone. She still misses it. She still cries when she sees the photos, but now she cries with purpose. Cry knowing that your story is healing other hearts. And that, in itself, is already a miracle. And you, who are watching now, have you ever thought that maybe your pain could also become a ministry? That your fight, no matter how cruel it may seem, could be the key to freeing someone? It is not easy to understand God's ways. Sometimes we want answers, and He gives us a call. Sometimes we want explanation, and He gives us direction. But one thing is certain, God does not waste suffering. He transforms pain into mission, crying into testimony, loss into legacy. If this spoke to you, if you have ever felt that God used your story to touch other lives, write here, in the comments, "My pain also has a purpose." Leave this phrase as a prophetic statement. Share your experience if you like, because someone reading can identify with you, can feel embraced through your comment. And once again, don't forget to leave your like. This helps this video reach more broken hearts who need to hear this truth. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, sign up right now. Because here, each story is a healing tool, each testimony is a seed of faith, and each video is a reminder God still works miracles. What began as a senseless tragedy became a bridge of salvation for many lives, and this is just the beginning. Because what God started to do in Marta's life didn't stop there. There are moments in the journey of faith when inner transformation begins to bear external fruit. The restored heart begins to produce visible fruits, concrete changes, and that's exactly what started to happen to Marta. But to understand what came next, you need to stay with me, because the next chapter of this story will show you how much heaven moves when a heart is willing to be used by God, even in the midst of scars. The pain of loss did not go away. Marta still woke up in the middle of the night expecting to hear footsteps in the hallway. Sometimes he found himself calling his son's name out loud, as if he was still there, as if time could give a truce and give back what life took. And when she passed by the places they used to go together, the bakery on the corner, the newspaper stand where he bought comic books, the square where they played on Sundays, it was impossible not to feel a tightness in her chest. Grief is like this. It doesn't go away, but it changes shape. It stops being a desperate scream and becomes a constant whisper, a reminder of what was experienced and what will never be the same again. But what changed, and it did change profoundly, was the way Marta started to see this pain. What was once just suffering now carried an eternal purpose. The open wound was, little by little, transformed into a healing channel. God, with His infinite grace and power of restoration, did not take away the memory of loss, but gave it a new meaning. Samuel was still present, not in body, but in legacy. His life continued to touch other lives through his mother's testimony. And that, as surprising as it may seem, was the real miracle. Transforming tragedy in ministry, mourning on mission, I cry in comfort to other hearts. Marta now looked at the sky with another understanding. Before, she saw heaven as the place where her son was taken. Today, she saw heaven as the place from which God still supported her. And with every sunset, with every light wind that touched her face, she felt, God is here. He is watching over me. His presence became real in the little things. In the words of a brother of faith, in the hug of a child, in the smile of someone who listened to his story and said, "You gave me strength to continue." And I want you to stop for a moment and reflect. How many times could the pain you carry today be being shaped by God for a greater purpose tomorrow? How many times do we think we are being destroyed, when in reality we are being rebuilt, brick by brick, into something we still cannot understand? Martha didn't see this at first. She only saw darkness. But it was exactly in the darkness that the light of God's presence shone brightest. And it could be like that with you too. If you are living in a moment of mourning, of loss, of silence, if it seems like God has remained silent, if everything around you is falling apart and you feel like you won't be able to handle it, look at this story. Martha was not a superwoman. She wasn't stronger than you. She just made a choice, not letting go of God's hand, even when it seemed like he had moved away. And it is this faith, raw, real, full of tears, that moves mountains. It is this kind of faith that opens the heavens and attracts the supernatural of God. You don't need to understand everything now. God never asked us to understand. He asked us to trust, and true trust is born in the dark. It's easy to believe when everything is going well, but believing when everything is falling apart, that's genuine faith. This is delivery. This is total dependence on the God who still opens seas, heals hearts, resurrects dreams, and transforms lives. And that's why I want to ask you something now. Something simple but powerful. If this story is tugging at your heartstrings, if you feel like it spoke to you on some level, leave a word of faith here in the comments. It could be a sentence. It can be a short prayer. It might just be, "I trust you, Lord." Write as an act of surrender, because there is power in declaring faith, even when it is fragile. And your comments are not just read by me. Others will stop by and find in your words the comfort they were looking for. Your faith can rekindle someone's faith. You can also write the name of someone who is going through a difficult time, someone who needs comfort, a word, a touch from heaven. Let's create a network of intercession here in the comments. Let's fill this space with words that build, that restore, that lift up. God is in that place. He is using this video as a bridge to reach hearts, and you are part of it. And please, if you haven't already, leave your like right now. It may seem like a simple gesture, but it helps the algorithm. Understand that this video has value, that he is touching lives, that it needs to be spread. And believe me, there is someone right now, somewhere in the world, who needs to hear exactly what was said here. Your click could be the push this video needs to reach that person. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe right now. Here, every story is real. Every testimony is true, and each video is a seed of faith that can germinate in the hearts of those who need it most. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. God knows exactly where you are, what you are feeling, and how much you have been struggling. And he says, "Son, daughter, I'm still in control." Nothing that happened escaped his eyes. Nothing was in vain. He is working even when you don't see it. He is acting even when you don't feel it. And he still has beautiful plans for your life. Martha learned this firsthand. She didn't have all the answers, but there was direction. And that was enough. Because when you walk with God, you don't have to see the whole way. You just need to take the next step in faith. And that's what she did, step by step, one day at a time. And over time, what was pain became healing. What was mourning became a legacy. What was despair became a mission. And this mission continues even today. Martha continues to tell her story, continue to welcome other women. It continues to be a lighthouse for those who are sinking in pain. And you can do the same. You can turn your pain into testimony. You can use your story to touch other souls. You can let God use your scars as a map to guide others to him. But to do that, you need to make a choice. Trust, even without understanding, even without feeling it, even crying. Just trust. And this is exactly where we will continue. Because what God started in Martha's life, this silent, profound, supernatural transformation, was about to be expanded, because when God heals on the inside, He begins to open paths on the outside. And the next step of this journey will show you that heaven doesn't just console, it also sends. It doesn't go away. What follows is proof that your pain can become your calling. Martyr's testimony is one of those stories that we never forget, because he doesn't just talk about a loss, he doesn't just talk about a tragedy, he talks about transformation. It speaks of God's supernatural power to act in places where no one else can reach. It talks about rebuilding from what was completely destroyed. Martha not only survived the greatest pain of her life, she was restored, remade, repositioned. And all of this was not the result of chance. It was the result of a God who transforms mourning in legacy, pain towards tear in seed of life. How many times do we ask ourselves if there is a solution to what we are facing? How many times do we feel like we've tried everything, that we've prayed, cried out, searched, and yet it seems like heaven is closed? But stories like Martyr's come like a well-aimed arrow into the heart of doubt, because they remind us that the God's actions are not limited to our understanding. He is not tied to time. He does not bow to circumstances. He does not remain silent in the face of suffering. He remains God when everything falls apart, and more than that, he specializes in bringing purpose out of ruins. Can you imagine the impact Martyr's testimony had, not just in her life, but in everyone who has crossed her path since then? People who were on the verge of suicide and gave up on death because of one word. Women who were in mourning and found hope again. Young people who were lost and returned to God after hearing their story. This is no coincidence. This is a miracle. And God showing that He doesn't waste any tears, that even the deepest pain, when placed in His hands, can become an instrument of healing for others. And that's exactly why you can't keep this story to yourself. There is someone right now, yes, right now, who is crying in the silence of their room, who is about to give up, who believes there is no way out. And the simple act of you sharing this video could be what prevents a tragedy, what changes the course of a life. You can be the bridge that brings hope. So with all the love and sincerity I have at this moment, I ask you, enjoy this video right now. This shows YouTube that this content is relevant and helps it to be delivered to more people who need it. The algorithm may not understand what we are doing here, but heaven does. Each like is an amen, it's an I believe. It's a push that this testimony needs to reach those who are lost. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Here, we are not just telling stories. Here we are sowing faith, activating hearts, building a community of people who know that the impossible is just the beginning when God is in control. Every week, new testimonies, new messages, new living proof that heaven still responds. And if you are already subscribed, share this channel with someone. Send it to that friend who is discouraged, for that mother who lost a child, for that father who no longer sees a way out, for that young woman who thinks her life ended because of emotional pain. Don't underestimate the power of a testimony. The Bible says that we overcome the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of our testimony. Revelation 12:11. So witnessing is not just telling something, it is spiritually waging war on behalf of others. You might even think, but I don't have a story like Martyr's, and I tell you, you do. Yes, each of us has a testimony. It can be a cure, a deliverance, a turnaround, a peace that came out of nowhere in the midst of the storm. God acts in different ways, but always with the same purpose, to show us that He is present, that He loves us, and that there is still a greater purpose. Now, I want to propose something very special for those of you who have stayed here. If this story truly touched your heart, if God spoke to you through it, write the following sentence in the comments. Nothing is lost when God is present. This is not just a comment. It is a prophetic statement. It is a word of faith released into the spiritual world. And who knows, when reading this sentence, someone who is in pieces will find the strength to continue. You can also use the comments to tell your own story. It doesn't have to be long. It could be just a sentence, a brief testimony, a prayer, request. We are forming a true family of faith here, where each comment can become a seed of renewal in someone's life. And if you want more than comment, if you want intercede, pray for each name that appears here. You may not know these people, but God does. And He can use your silent prayer to do something supernatural in the life of someone you've never met. Because that is the beauty of faith. It connects strangers through common hope. Testimonies like Martha's show us that God continues to do the impossible. He continues to restore families, heal hearts, rewrite stories. He hasn't changed. The same God who gave Martha the strength to get up from the ground and transform her pain into a mission is the same one who is with you right now, exactly where you are. And believe me, you are not here by chance. If you watched this video until the end, it's because the Holy Spirit is calling you to something greater. It is reminding you that there is a purpose even in the tear that fell, silently. That there is a living promise about your story, that there is something big about to happen if you decide to trust. And it is with this certainty in our hearts that we continue. Because what God started in Martha, He wants to start in you. The next video, the next testimony could be yours. And the question remains, are you willing to give your pain into the hands of the Father and let Him transform everything? Comment here if you feel that God spoke to you through this video. Comment if you are ready to take the next step of faith, because heaven is listening, and the miracle you're waiting for could be just one delivery away. So let's go together. What God is still going to do, you won't want to miss it.